if you materially participate in this property, then now all of a sudden you can take those losses and write them off against your active income.
How do you find a good CPA, someone that knows what they're talking about, that's qualified?
Us as investors in the short-term rental world, that's a huge deal.
Wow, that'd be a really tough letter to get.
There's a lot of people talking about it right now, and in my opinion, a lot of misconceptions. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Moore. We're back with Whiskey Wednesday, and we're back with Mr. Jake Sheehy, our producer, content manager, and everything technical and content that goes on here at Vodyssey. So Jake's going to be my new co-host.
Excited to be here. Thank you for having me, man. I'm really excited.
Jake popped out the old Coke Zero in memory of Dave.
Yeah.
And so if Dave's listening, Dave, we're not going to retire the Coke Zero anytime soon. It's going to be in here in whiskey. I am sticking to my whiskey, but Jake is pulling up the Coke Zero. So, guys, these episodes are short, sweet, to-the-point episodes where we're going to dive into specific topics. And so Jake's got a number of topics for us, and we've got questions that you guys send in. So, as always, shoot us over your questions to support@vodyssey.com, and we'll make sure that we answer it on an upcoming episode. So, what do you have, Jake, today?
Well, we're really diving into taxes. We're letting the audience know what's happening. Yeah. If you're late to the game, by the time this is coming out, you've already filed your taxes.
Yeah.
But
it was yesterday.
We're gonna discuss the loophole, what it is, bonus depreciation. We're gonna go through the biggest mistakes people make, what it takes to qualify, pros and cons. You're gonna answer one of my personal questions, and then someone said something on Instagram, a comment that I think is pretty juicy, and some good tips that will come from that. But we're starting out with taxes, the loophole. For people who don't know, what is it?
Yeah. So it's tax season's right here. I mean, you either filed an extension yesterday or you got your taxes in and mailed off. And we're thinking about reducing that taxable income, and that's where the short-term rental loophole comes in a lot. There's a lot of people talking about it right now, and in my opinion, a lot of misconceptions. And so the short-term rental loophole, when it comes to real estate investing, a lot of real estate investors love the word depreciation, and they love depreciation because it's a paper loss, a paper write-off.
Okay.
And I'll dive into that in just a minute, because I probably should give a disclaimer that I'm not a CPA. Those of you that are listening to this, I've got a lot of opinions on the short-term rental loophole because that's an asset class we invest in. I've got a team. I don't do my own taxes. I have some amazing CPAs, and you all should have some amazing CPAs if you're going to dive into some of the things we're going to talk about today. So as like a full disclosure, you need to seek the advice of the professionals that understand what they're doing, and we'll talk about how to find some of those professionals. So, but when it comes down to it, as a real estate investor, there's, as far as the IRS is concerned, there's different income buckets, right? Okay. And there's two that are concerned for it's called our active income. That's if we go to our job and it's our W-2 income. Like, what do we do to actively make our money? That's the biggest income that most people make, and it's their biggest tax liability is on their active income.
Okay.
And then there's what's called passive income buckets. And that's where things like real estate and those types of things that create passive income come in. You're not actively working it, and it's you buy a portfolio of rental properties, and it creates passive income. And so you have income that's taxed as passive income. Well, when it comes to write-offs in your active income, in your passive income buckets, they have to stay, those write-offs, if you have losses against your real estate portfolio, it has to be written off against your passive income bucket. Okay. You can't take that and transfer it and say, well, I want to use that loss against my active income because that's where I'm paying most of my taxes. And so what happens is a lot of real estate investors, you can depreciate these properties and you write it off against your passive income, which is great. But what if you have these big losses and you don't have a ton of income in your passive income bucket, and you want to write it off against active. That's where the short-term rental loophole comes in. And so what happens is there's a rule with the IRS that if a property has an average lease length of less than 7 days, so if it's average less than 7 days that people are using your property throughout the year, then you qualify, and you can qualify as a material participant. And so what that means is if you materially participate in this property, then now all of a sudden you can take those losses and write them off against your active income. So that becomes huge.
Right.
In regular real estate, you hear the term real estate professional status all the time. And what that means is there's qualifications to become a real estate professional. And a lot of CPAs confuse material participants with real estate professionals. Real estate professionals allow you now, if you're a real estate professional, it says, well, that your active income is in the real estate world. So we're going to let you take these losses and depreciation against your active income if you're a real estate professional. It's very hard to qualify for unless that's what you do full time. And so most W-2 income earners, high income earners, they don't qualify because you have to do that activity more than anything else. And if you have a full-time job, that means you're not doing that activity more than anything else. Right. And so you know, if you are a full-time real estate investor, you work as a broker, you're in the real estate world, then there's qualifications. So for the sake of this conversation, we're going to take and tell everybody, okay, if your CPA or somebody else says, well, you can't do that because you don't qualify as a real estate professional, they're absolutely true. But with short-term rentals, that's where the loophole comes in.
Right.
Right.
Okay,
so
I'm with you.
It allows regular, everyday income earners to buy real estate and then ultimately write it off against their active income. So now the fun starts happening where you start to say, okay,
here we go.
Now I can, now I can participate in this thing that they call the eighth wonder of the world, this thing called depreciation, and then bonus depreciation, which is just like depreciation. The IRS allows us to take property, excluding the land. You can't depreciate land, so you take the land value out of the equation. If I buy a property for, let's say, $500,000, and we determine the land is $100,000 of that, then I've got this real estate asset that I can depreciate of $400,000. And then they allow us to depreciate different lengths of time for different types of materials, like 27 and a half years for a lot of the building materials. You've got fixtures and stuff, and there's short-term depreciation of 5 to 7 years. You've got land improvements like gates and fences and different things like that that you can depreciate over 12 and a half, 15 years. And so there's all these different rules, right? It gets really confusing really quick. Yeah. And what we want to do, though, is to say, okay, there's this thing called bonus depreciation, and it's been phasing out. And it's been phasing out that we're supposed to be completely gone by the end of the year 2026. And so right now, 2025, they're allowing us 40% bonus depreciation. A lot of people are holding their breaths because Trump has come in and said, hey, I'm committed to bringing back 100% bonus depreciation with the Tax Cut Jobs Act of 2017. And so we're going to reinstate all that stuff, and we're going to get that back going to spur the economy and all these things. Well, for us as investors in the short-term rental world, that's a huge deal, or any real estate investor. Or it's the same as if businesses buy airplanes and they justify, I'm going to go buy a new corporate jet. And then they do that a lot of times because they get a 20 or 30% discount on it because they take that entire purchase, depreciate it, and reduce their taxable liability by the amount of that purchase, right? In real estate, we don't just get to go take the whole purchase and write it off against bonus depreciation. But what it is now all of a sudden we say, okay, we can start playing this game that becomes pretty fun, pretty fast. You following me?
I'm with you.
Okay,
I'm totally with you.
All right. I'm trying to paint the picture, then we'll dive into the pros and cons of it, right?
Okay.
So now I say, okay, short-term rentals are attractive now because average everyday income earners that are not real estate professionals can now look at an asset class that will allow them to depreciate and then ultimately, hopefully, bonus depreciate at 100% if that comes back this year, that this purchase, and it reduces our tax liability significantly. Yeah. And so everybody starts talking about this short-term rental loophole. And that's where it became, especially short-term rentals became very popular the last few years now. Yeah. CPAs and investors are starting to realize, hey, this is a pretty good option for us as an asset class. Right. So we start looking at this, and what that allows us to do then is to say, okay, now I don't have to be a real estate professional. I have to materially participate in this property. And there's different qualifications for material participation. And again, talk to your CPA, make sure that you've got a professional that shows you what qualifies, what doesn't qualify, but it's going to come down to a couple things. Okay. You've got to spend time operating and setting up and managing and marketing this asset. And that does not mean that you can't have a full service property manager.
That was my question. Okay.
I have full service property managers on my properties, and there's a big misconception. I hear people online all the time talking. I see it on Instagram everywhere. You can't do this if you have a property manager. That's a bunch of crap. And I can tell you 100% it's crap because I'm going through an audit right now of a property I bought in 2022 that we bonus depreciated, and we're passing through that audit with flying colors. And I had a full service property manager during that time.
Right.
I still had to qualify as a material participant, which I did. And I put my hours in, and I have, I was tracking our hours, doing a lot of different things. We were setting up that property. We were furnishing the property. We were designing it. We were marketing it. We were doing a lot of different things. Right.
Right.
And I was managing the property manager, and I had more hours than anybody else on that property. So there's two kind of qualifications. You can spend 500 hours doing this. And then that's kind of the gold standard.
500 hours.
500 hours, right? Seems like a lot. The year you purchase your property, though, and this is where you want to talk to your CPA and your professionals, there's a lot of things that qualify for those hours that you may not be thinking qualify.
Okay.
Now, I'm not going to go through all that because I don't want to. I don't want somebody saying, "Hey, I listened to Shawn tell me what qualified and I didn't." But you need to talk to somebody about what qualifies. There's a lot of things that will qualify. And it qualifies pretty quick. And if it's a husband and wife team, you can collectively qualify those hours and collectively put together 500 hours.
You can do that pretty fast.
You can, especially in the acquisition year. That setup phase in short-term rentals, furnishing, all that stuff takes some time, right? And so getting that stuff set up, if you're going to manage your property, it takes some time. I don't manage my property, so I do a lot of marketing on my property. So I do things to try to maximize that asset, but I'm directly involved in marketing. And then the second qualification tier, which is kind of the silver standard instead of the gold standard, is 100 hours, but more than anybody else. And that's a key factor right there. You have to have, if somebody else has 101, you have to have 102. If somebody has 150, you have to have 151.
Right.
And so that, and the person you typically are competing against is not your property manager. It's usually your cleaner, because your property manager is probably not spending 3 or 4 hours per booking. They're probably spending maybe an hour at the most per booking, 2 hours maybe per booking. And in a year, you're probably getting 50 or 60 total bookings for the whole year, right? Your cleaner, on the other hand, might be spending 3 or 4 hours there. And if it's the same individual cleaner every single time, that person's stacking up quite a bit of hours. And but even in that case, let's say there were 60 turns a year, that's more than one a week. That's a very successful property. And they're spending 3 hours there. That's 180 hours. So in that case, I would have to have 181 hours in order for me to have more hours than my cleaner did. And so it's tracking. There's things you have to do, right? There's check boxes that have to be checked off to be a material participant. What it does is it allows you now the choice to say, okay, now I did materially participate in this property, so now I can take these losses against my active income. And when it comes to depreciation and bonus depreciation in particular, you go get what's called a cost segregation done. And that's going to be an engineered study that they come in and they tell you, here's how many 2x4s you have. Here's the cost and the value of that. Here's how much tile was used in the property. Here's what are the windows worth? And they go and they cost segregate out and they list all the materials in the property.
Right.
And they give you a value at it. And then ultimately they send you that value and say, here's how much you can write off, right? And so I'll give you an example of the property I'm getting audited right now.
Okay.
It was a property I bought in Georgia. I bought it for $800,000. I ended up doing fully materially participated in the property. I had over 500 hours. We were setting it up and we traveled there and did some stuff on it. Teresa and I did. And so we ended up qualifying for that. The $800,000 purchase, I put 20% down, $160,000 down. And then this, I'll give you this example so you see the power of this.
Okay.
What ended up happening is we did a cost seg study and we got a write-off from our cost segregation study of $244,000 and change, right? And so there's about a $245,000 write-off.
Okay.
What I did is that write-off then reduced my taxable income by almost $95,000.
Wow.
So I paid, by buying this property, I paid almost $95,000 less to the IRS by buying the property. So my net into the property, my down payment now, instead of being $160,000, my net in was $65,000 because instead of, I would have either paid it to the IRS or I don't pay it to the IRS. I keep it for my next investment or I put it in this property, right?
So that's where it gets fun, huh?
That's where it gets fun.
That's where it gets attractive.
Now, The drawback of that is,
Okay.
right?
All right.
And this is where people, I think right now, it's a little bit frustrating because they're I feel like getting in trouble a little bit, because what's happening is they hear those numbers and they talk to people. I just was on a webinar of a CPA trying to sell turnkey short-term rental properties. And what they did is they just went and developed these cookie cutter proproperties. This was in Texas. They bought this land, developed cookie cutter properties. They look like just regular homes. They're not great short-term rentals. They just tagged them all as short-term rentals, put them on Airbnb, sold them to investors saying, hey, listen, you go buy this, you materially participate, you got this big tax write-off. And then all these people are going to call in a year or two and realize, these aren't producing. I'm not making money. And so you cannot, Mike Pine, my CPA, who's been on this podcast 3 or 4 times now, has been, him and Kevin, they say you can't let the tax tail wag the investment dog, right?
Good saying. That's pretty nice. Okay.
Yeah, right? So they say that all the time. And what they mean by that is, don't go buy investments based on the tax savings. It could be a huge lever in the return and being able to build a portfolio and everything else. You still have to own these properties. They still have to produce. Well, what happens, Jake, if I buy a property and I did it for the tax reasons only, I didn't pay attention what it takes to succeed in short-term rentals. I didn't pay attention if it was a good purchase or a bad purchase, the income potential, all the things that are important.
Right.
And then a year from now, you're like, man, I'm bleeding out on this property. Hey, Shawn, I want to sell this property because I didn't know what I was doing in short-term rentals. I just wanted to do it for the taxes.
Right.
And you have this asset that's costing you money every month. You didn't play the game correctly. And then guess what happens? You have to recapture all of that. So not only do you have a dog investment, when you go sell that property, the IRS is going to say, hey, Shawn, by the way, you're selling this property and you just got a $95,000 reduction in taxes. Hey, we want that money back because now you owe us because you just got rid of that asset. So it's a recapture of all that. So that's why it's really, really important to buy a good, solid investment first, because if in a year or two from now, that property is making money for you, it's appreciating, it's putting money in your pocket, and you're actually having some cash flow, you're like, hey, I want to do this again. I don't want to sell it, right? So you have no motivation to sell it unless if you paid attention to the investment first, the tax is second. And then you start to really capitalize and you start, like cooking with peanut oil, they say, right?
Wow, that'd be a really tough letter to get. The IRS, and we want that money back.
Yeah.
You already didn't recapture it. You didn't have a hot year.
You can 1031 it forward into other properties and things like that. But if you're not playing the game because you understand the short-term rental game, don't dive into it because of this short-term rental loophole that sounds awesome. And it is awesome. We use it all the time, and we think it's an amazing lever to pull, and we get some amazing returns on our investments because of it.
Right.
But it's the investment first, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't, when you sell that property, that depreciation has to be recaptured.
Oh, man. That's pretty tough. Okay, is there another con or other mistake that people are doing, you think?
Yeah, no, I think that you have to look at how long you want to have these assets, right? If it's less than 5 years, like I buy properties that I'm like, I'm probably going to have a 3 to 5 year exit. I don't bonus depreciate them because I don't want to have to recapture. I don't want to have to worry about the 1031 into the next property. If it's a more of a 5 year or more deal, a longer term deal, that's when I would consider doing it.
Okay.
And then being able to, and then also the big mistake too, you better be diligent about the hours and the time that you're spending and really tracking it. That first year when you're going to do this, right? You have to look at it almost like a side hustle. It's like, hey, somebody's like, well, man, you all the Google Sheets that I paid attention to and all the things I took good notes of. One, I can't stand that we're in the middle of an audit, but I wasn't anticipating that. But you should always assume that you're going to have an audit so that when you have to turn that stuff over, you're golden, right? And does it take time? Yeah. It's supposed to take time. That's the whole point. You're supposed to materially participate in this property, right? Yeah. And part of that tracking is not even hours that you can spend, but if I'm reducing my taxes by $95,000, it's pretty good time spent, right? And especially having those trackable hours is worth it for me to take a little bit of extra time and be diligent about that.
Okay, so how should How should someone do that? You just have like an Excel sheet. Every time you work on it, you just kind of plug in your hours, like you clock in.
Yeah, there's apps that do it. There's like Clockify and different apps that a lot of our Vodyssey family uses. I just use Google Sheets.
Right.
I literally just use a Google Sheet spreadsheet. I have a file for all my properties, and I use that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful. Well, all those things kind of lead into this next question. You're on the webinar with that CPA, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into this to get the taxes, to get the depreciation, all of this stuff to qualify. How do you find a good CPA, someone that knows what they're talking about, that's qualified in the, each state or each county, city, or whatever has their own regulations? How do you find a good person? Do you ask them certain questions? How do you weed them out?
Yeah.
Teach me.
One, I want to, it's just like any other, when you're hiring any other coach, I want to make sure that they are doing the thing that I want to do. Right. And so this, I'm not just, they could be a really smart CPA that works with business owners and everything else, but they've never worked with investors that buy short-term rentals.
Right.
How often have they done that? Have they ever got challenged in an audit? Have they, I look for a good CPA has been through an audit or two. They are also, this is a mainstream asset class at this stage. And so if you're your CPA, when you're doing something specific like this that's very niche, and you're running down a road like this, they should work with other investors, have portfolios of short-term rentals. They understand the asset class, they understand the game. They also are working with other W-2 income earners, high income earners. In our case, like Mike and Kevin at Revo Tax Advisors, will go look at some of those past episodes. Go have a consultation with those guys. They're out of Dallas.
Last week.
Yeah,
we had one last week about them.
Yeah, so I would have them on any short list because I believe they're the best in the business. There's a lot of people right now that I see online that I feel like it's clickbait a little bit. I feel like that they're out there just trying to get the clicks on a kind of a hot new topic.
Right.
But I could tell by them talking, they don't even know what they're doing. That CPA was a really good CPA that put on the webinar that I was watching, but leading people down the wrong road with short-term rentals, because nothing that he said was inaccurate.
Right.
Everything he said was correct.
Okay.
There's nothing that he was doing that was wrong in leading people down it. What he didn't understand is the short-term rental game. He didn't understand the actual asset class. He didn't understand what it takes to succeed. And he didn't understand that just buying these properties, people are gonna wake up. Took one look at those properties and thought I would never put $1 into those as a short-term rental. I actually thought they make good long-term rentals, but they're not going to make good short-term rentals. And I even was quickly running the underwriting, and I respect the guy that put the CPA that put this webinar on. I think he's really smart, very articulate. This is a brand new asset class. You could tell that he was just getting into, understood the tax side of it. But again, he's letting that tax tail wag the investment dog.
Right.
Didn't understand the investment side of it. And that's the biggest mistake I think people are making right now, is that you start with the investment, start with the asset class. Make sure you're buying good quality assets in quality areas that have the potential to produce, and you know what it takes to produce in the asset that you're getting into. Because if you're gonna run down this tax road, it can be a very powerful, you can really accelerate your progress, but you can also wake up tomorrow with an asset that's not producing. You're like, what do I do? I'm going to have to write a huge check to sell this. And then you're just stuck saying, do I want to bleed it out on a monthly basis where I'm losing money every month, or do I want to stroke a huge check to get out of this on the tax side, on the loss on the income side, on the asset itself, because you just furnished this property as a short-term rental, it doesn't produce. That's the biggest mistake that I think. And I think that when you're selecting a CPA, make sure they're played the game for a while, right? I want to know that they're working with a lot of people, right? We pay enough money for the things that when we hire professionals, they're not going to be your $300 tax return, right? They're not going to be going to H&R Block. They're not going to be a regular tax return. And somebody you're going to pay a lot of money. They should have the experience in writing the types of returns and using asking the questions of what qualifies, what doesn't qualify. Like they shouldn't, when I say go, that's a good question. Like, hey, what's the time I can track to materially participate? What does this mean if I sell this property?
Right.
And if they have a hard time answering those questions, that haven't probably done it. Those are pretty simple questions if you know this asset class.
Right. Okay, so there's two sides to it. right? There's the taxes side, but then you also got to put the work in. And if it doesn't, this goes great into our Instagram thing. Okay, this is perfect. All right, so someone commented on one of our posts. Thank you for the comment. Hopefully this helps. He said, Shawn makes it sound so easy. One of the greatest challenges for us is always trying to be targeted. We always want to be everything to everyone. Wow.
Right. So that's a comment on a post where I was talking about selecting a target audience, narrowing down your niche, right? Niches are in the rich, as we say.
Right.
And that's a common saying that a lot of people have heard before. It is very difficult to do, just like the comment mentions. It's way easier to talk about than actually pull off and do. However, when you're everything to everybody, you're attractive to nobody. Right. You really are. You're when you're just trying to be, kind of vanilla in the middle of the road. Anybody, I can be good for couples, I can be good for families, I can be good for adventure seekers. You're just not going to. You're going to blend in the crowd with everybody else. Right.
Yeah.
Marketing 101 is you've got to attract a customer. The first part of attracting a customer is being able to identify what people are looking for. And the only way to do that, you're not going to be able to attract everybody. You have to say, okay, I'm going to be really attractive for couples coming into this area, or I'm going to be really attractive for the adventure seekers that are coming to this area, right? Or whatever it is.
Right.
You've got to pick your target audience, and then it's much easier to be able to narrow down and niche down an experience so that you will stop the scroll with the right people, right? And so the great marketing actually repels a lot of people. The best marketing actually gets more people to say, no, I don't want that, than yes, I do. But the people, because if you have the ability to get people to say, no, that's not really for me, then you also have an amazing ability to get the right person to say, that's exactly what I want, and nobody else has what I want. So I'm gonna select that. And guess what? When you have that ability, you also have the ability to justify higher prices. Because if you give a customer a reason to pay you more, they will. And they pay more for two major reasons. And you can go look it up, and it's not just in short-term rentals. This is consumer behavior 101. They want personalized experience and a unique experience. And so if you can create something that they feel like is personalized for them, and it's unique to them, and it's not the same as what everybody else has, they're willing to pay more money for it. And so that's consumer behavior 101. Marketing 101 is being able to have the guts to say, I'm going to get everybody to say no to me except for this group. And that group is going to love me, and they're going to read your ad, and they're going to see your pictures, and they're going to think, man, did this guy steal a page out of my diary? Was he reading like everything about me? Because this is exactly what I want.
Man, that is a leap of faith. Hearing you talk about that, believing in yourself, believing in what we teach here at Vodyssey, believing it and really going for it. And then you hear about like the tax savings that if you follow through with this and you start making that money, you could have amazing tax benefits at the end of the year. But if you're just willy-nilly vanilla going for everything to everyone, you have those losses. It could be bad.
It's tough.
Yeah, you need both sides of this.
Game. You do have to have both sides of it, and that our Instagram comment that we saw, it is hard, and I 100 fully acknowledge that it's a lot easier to talk about than actually do it.
Right.
But we also have right outside the studio door, we've got our wall of fame with our 1% club, and so we see lots and lots of properties that are doing this, and they're the very top properties in their market, and because they decided to niche it down, personalize it, become unique for a small group of people, but that group of people is willing, it's plenty of people for you to make money with, and it's easy to attract them, convert them, retain them.
Love it. Well, this has been an amazing episode. We got tons of great stuff, but let's do a little sneak peek for next week.
All right, what do we got next week?
So next week we had an amazing comment here on our school platform, and it's the changes to Airbnb off-platform payment policy and guest contact information.
Love it. Yeah, that's going to be a big one. The payment policy, guest contact information, that was sweeping changes that just happened April 10th. So if you guys have properties on Airbnb, you got to look at it and then tune into next week. I like that. That could be a full episode.
Yeah.
That might not just be a question, right?
No, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of bullet points here, but we'll dive into it next week. Make sure to tune into it. But great episode today.
Okay, good job, man. Good stuff. I appreciate it. So guys, we know how valuable your time is. We appreciate you spending it with us. As always, if you got any value out of the show, somebody else would like to be a part of these conversations, share the show. Those things help us. If you have more than 30 seconds, like it or review it on whatever platform you're watching or listening on. And if you have questions, make sure you send them in to support@vodyssey.com. And the final, most important thing I ask you at the end of every episode is pick that one thing you can do today to start building that life you don't want to take a vacation from. Cheers, my friends. Cheers, brother.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. Share this with other people you think need to hear about it. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Hey Grace, is there a website? Yes! For more amazing content and expert advice, visit Vodyssey.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.